Hello, my name is John Alt. I'm the woodshop manager here at Twin Cities Maker. In today's video, we're going to cover our planer in the woodshop. We'll cover the different parts of the planer, how to set up the planer for your very first initial pass, as well as go over some special considerations that you need to be aware of because we're using carbide blades in the planer. So let's get started. I've taken the top of the planer off so that you could take a look at the helical head. What this is a series of carbide teeth that are wrapped around the cutter head in a helical pattern. What this allows is that when the head is spinning, the teeth will actually slice at the wood rather than being straight on, which basically gives you a very nice cut, as well as it leads to a very quiet operation of the machine. Being that the teeth on the cutter head are made out of carbon, they're basically a lot more fragile than high-speed steel is. What this means is that if something hard hits them, it will actually shatter the tooth and a lot of times can cause a domino effect, shattering multiple teeth in the cutter head. In order to avoid that, we ask that you do the following things before you start sending wood through the planer. The first is remove any glue that's on the top of the wood. So any glue that's protruding off more than about 1/32 of an inch should be scraped off with a chisel or a scraper of some sort. The second is check the knots in the wood to see if they're loose. Knots in the wood are basically very, very hard material. If they were to come loose, they could get jammed in the cutter head and break a couple of the cutting teeth. The big thing with the planer and a lot of our machines here at Twin Cities Maker is that we do not allow any sort of reclaimed wood of any type. This includes any sort of painted, varnished, stained, basically any wood that isn't in its raw format. If you take the look at our machine, you're going to notice all these scratch marks. On the right side of the planer, you're going to notice there's a few different knobs. First, you have your height adjustments. So basically by turning this, you're going to raise or lower the height of the bed. You have two locking knobs, which should be either loosened or tightened, here and here. And then your third knob, which you'll hardly ever have to touch, is your feet adjustment knob. So you have two different speeds on this particular planer. You have 23 feet per minute and 18 feet per minute. Essentially, if you were wanting a very fine finish on your wood, you would adjust it to 18 feet per minute. It gives the wood a little bit more time underneath the cutter heads and will give you a smoother finish. However, if you're doing a lot of board feet, you're going to want to set it at the 23 feet per minute. The big thing with this is always make sure that the planer is on before touching that knob. The planer actually has to be on and engaged in order for the mechanism to actually change the different gears. If you ever try to plane wood and the cutter head is not spinning at all, what happened is that somebody most likely accidentally bumped this knob. All you have to do is again turn on the machine and either push the knob all the way in or pull the knob all the way out. The next thing we're going to talk about is how to set up the planer for your very first pass. The first thing you want to do is insert your piece of wood into the planer so that it's sticking out both the front and the back of the planer. What you're looking for is that the piece of wood is longer than basically the bed of the machine. So if you look, you'll see that this is actually sticking out on the front as well as it is in the back. If your piece of wood isn't long enough to span this length, essentially what's going to happen is that it will rock as it goes through the machine, causing all sorts of divots and snipe across the wood. After you've checked that your piece of wood is long enough to be used with this particular planer, the next thing you want to do is slowly raise the bed until the anti-kickback devices are just slightly resting on top of the piece of wood. The anti-kickback devices are basically a number of very dull teeth that kind of protrude to the bottom of this front leading lip here. You can actually push them up with your fingers if you want to. And they just ensure that the wood doesn't get ejected back towards the user when you're planing. So again, raise that table up until those little metal pieces are just resting on top of the piece of wood. At this point, we're going to turn on the machine, and then we're going to slowly raise the bed of the table till the wood ejects out of the machine. This operation isn't going to be cutting the wood at all. It's just getting the top surface of the wood to fractions of an inch below the cutting head. So we'll turn on the machine. At this point, we're going to raise the bed of the machine just by a quarter turn of the handle. We'll lock the bed with the two locking knobs on the front and back. We'll then turn on the dust collector as well as the machine and send our piece of wood through the planer. The very first time you send it at this setting, you may or may not cut the top of the wood, and that's okay. If you don't cut at all, what you'll want to do is loosen the locking knobs on both the front and the back, do another quarter of a turn on the handle, lock the locking knobs, and send your wood through the machine. Essentially, by the second or third time that you repeat that procedure, you'll get a pretty even cut all the way down the surface of your wood, as long as you're relatively flat and even. Again, this process is basically a surefire way so that you don't take off too much material